What's up? Dan Blewett here, and in today's video, we're going to talk about the two-seamer and whether or not youth pitchers should be throwing a two-seamer. And if you are going to throw a two-seamer, we're going to talk about a bunch of different grips and what's going to be the most effective way for you to do it. So if you're new to my channel, I put out new baseball videos each week. Definitely a heavy emphasis on pitching since that's what I was. I was a pro pitcher for 6 seasons. But if you're new here, definitely stick around and check out the links in the description. I have a pitching manual called Pitching Isn't Complicated, and I also have a memoir about my baseball career called Dear Baseball Gods. So definitely check those out. Really good reads if you're interested. All right, so in today's video, we're gonna cover a bunch of different topics. Number one, should youth pitchers be throwing a changeup? It's not appropriate for everyone, but I see tons and tons of kids being told by their coaches that you've gotta throw a two-seamer, everyone has to throw a two-seamer. It's not necessarily true. Number two, is it better than the four-seamer? Again, not necessarily true. Number three, what grips are best to get the most sink and run out of our two-seamer? So we'll cover some grips in a little bit. Number four, why your two-seamer accidentally cuts. And this is one of my biggest issues with youth kids throwing two-seamers because most of them are either dead straight or they cut. And if it's cutting or it's straight, then why are we bothering to throw it? So we either need to be able to throw it properly or we should not throw it at all. Number four, where the two-seamer is going to move best on the plate. So arm side versus glove side, we'll cover that quickly, and I'll explain some general tactics about throwing your two-seamer and where it's going to get the best possible result. And lastly, we'll talk about who is best suited for the pitch. So again, this is not a one-size-fits-all, which is basically the attitude that I think most people have about the two-seamer. It's really not a one-size-fits-all. And so I'm going to discuss some of the pitchers who are more suited for a changeup and some of them who are not. So we're going to cover that at the end, but stick around. This is going to be a really in-depth video. So if you don't know whether a two-seamer is right for you, or if you throw a two-seamer and you're not sure if it's good enough, or you're trying to just round out your repertoire, definitely stick around and watch this video because I'm going to go really into depth on a lot of these concepts in pitching. All right, so first topic, should youth pitchers be throwing a two-seamer? So I've worked with a lot of pitchers in my career as a pitching coach, and obviously my career as a pitching coach is still ongoing. But if I see 50 kids, say in a period of time, and they all throw two-seamers, this is the percentage breakdown that I basically see. I see 40 that don't move at all. They're basically just dead straight. They might as well be a four-seamer. Out of the last 10 of the 50, I see 5 that cut. So they're going the wrong way because a two-seamer shouldn't cut, it should run. Cut goes to your glove side, which we'll cover in a minute. Run goes to your arm side. So basically they throw like a bad cutter by accident. And then the other 5 actually have some decent two-seam movement. So the vast majority of kids end up throwing a very straight, there's really no difference than a four-seamer. And if we can teach them out of that and we can teach them the right way and actually get some movement, fantastic. But with most of these kids coming into me throwing a two-seamer because their coach advocated for it, yet they don't throw it well at all, there's a disconnect there. So if we're going to teach kids to throw a two-seamer, number one, we need to teach them to do it right, and we need to check the spin and the movement to make sure it's actually a worthwhile pitch. If we're just going to say, use the two-seam grip, and that's your two-seamer, then I strongly disagree with that. So it either has to act like a real two-seamer, which means it moves to the arm side, or we should just throw a four-seamer. And again, most young pitchers accidentally cut the ball. Not most, but a large percentage of pitchers actually cut the ball, which means it goes the wrong way. And here's why. So when we throw a four-seamer, obviously we're going across the horseshoe sideways, right? Now the wider you fork your fingers, and I'm going to come back to a two-seamer in a second, the wider we fork our fingers, as we release the ball, the more likely we are to put differential pressure on one side or the other. So if I'm releasing the ball off my middle finger here, I'm not actually in the center of the baseball, so there's a very high chance that I tilt it, and now the ball is going to cut by accident. So with the two-seamer, most kids come in and they're throwing the ball like this. So they've got their fingers forked right on the edges, and because these fingers are so far apart, and because the middle finger is longer. What typically happens is as this ball leaves the fingers, the middle one's the last one on the ball, and so it tilts it slightly. And so this grip is actually very conducive to a kid accidentally cutting the ball. And that's typically what I see a lot of. So most pro guys, when they throw a two-seamer, here are the common grips. Number one, they just put their fingers really close together. So most pro guys, you don't see them throw a two-seamer with their fingers smack in the middle of the lace like this, all right? Most of them put their fingers pretty close together, if not touching, at the very minimum. After that, they start to offset the ball. So our goal when we are trying to get a two-seamer to move is to get slightly on the inside of it. So we're a little bit here. That's what's gonna give us arm side movement. Now it's not a significant amount because we're not making this into a change-up where we're getting on the inside or a screwball. We're just gonna release the ball slightly on the inside of the ball. And when we do that, it's just gonna give it a little bit of tilt. And now as it runs, especially when we have a lower arm slot, it's not gonna resist gravity as well as a four-seamer, so it's not gonna have that backspin that helps it stay up. It's gonna start to sink and fade into the ground a little bit and move slightly to the arm side. So our goal is to get slight pronation on the inside of the ball. Again, that's slightly doing this. And then that's gonna give the ball a little bit of tilt, a little bit of mixtured spin, and then the ball is going to start to bear towards the arm side. So again, if I'm a righty, that's going into a righty. If I'm a lefty, that's going into a lefty. Now, the big guys who are throwing sinkers and really heavily moving two-seamers, which here's the thing with sinker versus two-seamer. A sinker is a sinker when it sinks. A two-seamer is a sinker that doesn't sink that much. So basically the terms are interchangeable. There's no real difference in how you throw the two pitches. Rather, if you throw a two-seamer and it sinks a ton, we just kind of call it a sinker. If you throw a two-seamer and it doesn't sink a ton, it just kind of like fades to the arm side, then we really just call it a two-seamer. So the terms are mostly interchangeable. I mean, I've been around baseball a long time and I've had lots and lots of teammates throw two-seamers / sinkers. And really when the thing starts to really get heavy and start to dive a lot, that's when we call it a sinker. But it's not really different than a two-seamer. So the big common grips, guys throw a one-seamer a lot, so they'll load up and get here with the ball, and that helps them already get a little bit more of their finger pads on the inside of the ball, and that's gonna help them get that slight amount of tilt as they kind of pronate through the fastball. And again, pronation, if you're not familiar with the term, I have this camera lens right here. Pronation, if this is a glass of water, I'm just dumping out the glass of water. So that's what pronation is. So we're just trying to facilitate that. Really not much at all because we do it naturally afterwards, just a slight amount on the inside of the ball at release, okay? So, but it's important to understand pronation versus supination. When we throw a slider or a curveball or a cutter, we're supinating. We're on the other side of the ball. When we're throwing a sinker or a changeup, and definitely check out my changeup video in my YouTube channel because I talk about how we really pronate through the changeup to reduce the speed and to get on the inside of it to get some sink and heavy arm side run. That's pronation. So sinkers, changeups, two-seamers. The other thing with the two-seamer, there's two different ways to throw it. Most guys throw it with the railroad tracks like this because we call it a two-seamer because it goes 1-2 as it rotates. 1-2. Now, if I take it and I go across those railroad tracks like this, it's still a two-seamer. It's still going 1-2, 1-2. So either grip is okay, and you can tinker with that as well. So some guys, again, going back to that one-seam grip, they'll tilt it, they'll take their across grips, two-seam grip like this, and then they'll tilt it slightly that way. So now they're going along this, where it's kind of, again, like that one-seamer, and then they're going through the ball at release, and then it's getting this sort of more wobbly, angled spin, okay? So it's important to understand that the number one thing I'd say with throwing a good two-seamer is tinkering with the grip, because at the end of the day, you've got to see the pitch start to bear to your arm side. And it's not clear which grip is going to do that for you. But again, the maxims are relatively tried and true. Don't fork your fingers really far apart because you'll probably end up cutting the ball, if not making it just go completely straight and flat. So definitely get your fingers closer together. And then make sure you're offset slightly on the inside of the ball, which again, we're just putting our fingers in a position where we can turn on the inside of it. Again, that's getting us that slight amount of pronation through the ball that tilts it, which is gonna force it to move to the arm side. So fingers close together, either within the two-seam railroad tracks or across the two-seam railroad tracks. And then after that, we're gonna start to tilt it side to side. You can move up this one seam a little bit, and those are the little tweaks that you're looking for, okay? But you should definitely tweak and tinker a lot and throw them and ask your throwing partner for feedback, because that's how you're gonna figure out which grip works best with your natural throwing motion. Next big thing, who is well suited to throw a two-seamer or a sinker? Well, they're gonna be lower arm slot type guys. So if you're down here, you're naturally, let me move over and frame here, you're naturally gonna be able to roll over the ball a little bit easier. And so as you come through, it's gonna help it get some of that spin that doesn't resist gravity. Again, backspin resists gravity, so it will fall to the earth a little bit slower. It can't rise, but it'll fall slower. When we have side spin, so with a natural lower arm slot, backspin, the way it comes out of our fingers, is basically the ball just spinning sideways. So when you watch a two-seamer out of a guy with an arm slot like Chris Sale or Madison Bumgarner, their fastball by default is gonna spin like this, which doesn't resist gravity as well, so it's naturally gonna have some fade downward. So lower arm slot guys are always gonna have a better opportunity to throw a sinker or a two-seamer well compared to a high arm slot guy. When you're a high arm slot guy way up here, I gotta try to get in frame, you're gonna be through the middle of the ball a lot more, and it's tough to get on the inside of it without turning it too much, because you don't really turn a two-seamer or a sinker very, very much at all. It's extremely slight. It's really just that last little bit where it gets tilted. So we're not trying to make this into a screwball or a sinker. We're just trying to get through the ball and slightly tilt it, getting slight pressure to the inside of it. So when you're a really high arm slot guy, which I was like a 3/4 slot guy, it's really hard to make a two-seamer move. And at that point, the question is, should I even bother throwing this pitch? Does it fit me in my arm slot, in my repertoire? For me, it didn't. There was a time in my career personally when I was a little bit lower arm slot, and I threw actually a really good two-seamer. And I was breaking bats, and it was awesome. But I was also a naturally good curveball guy. So when I started to refine my curveball, this was after my first Tommy John surgery, when I started to move a little bit back to my normal slot and reclaim my curveball, my two-seamer just stopped moving. And so I retired as a curveball, high spin rate sort of four-seamer guy, where I pitched up in the zone and threw my curveball down, and I had a pretty heavy sinking changeup that I'd throw to lefties and sometimes into righties. But my point is that there was a time where I threw a really good two-seamer / sinker, and there was a time where my body just wouldn't allow it to happen. So again, if you're struggling to find a two-seamer to get movement, and your coach wants you to get movement, or you're a coach and you really want a kid to find some movement, if he's a high arm slot guy, you just need to understand that it's gonna be hard for him to do that. It's sometimes trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. So be sure to like help that kid, or if I'm talking directly to a player right now, be sure to tinker and ask your teammates and just keep moving. And if you tried a million different grips and it's just not moving, it just might not be the pitch for you, okay? There's nothing wrong with a four-seamer. And the idea that more movement is always better is mostly true, except when you can't actually get that movement. So if this was the case where everyone can make a ball move just by using a two-seam grip, then sure, everyone should throw a two-seamer. But I have not found that to be the case. And again, with most young pitchers, and I'll call that 10 to 16, most of them cannot make a two-seamer move well. And so they come into me and they throw me their two-seamer, and it's the same as their four-seamer. It's just like slightly slower and a little bit easier to see, especially compared to their curveball, because most kids throw a curveball in youth baseball. So a good tight curveball spins with a very white glassy spin, and a two-seamer looks very different than a curveball. So it doesn't really match up as well. And again, my experience has been that the vast majority of kids can't make a two-seamer move very well. Now, that's not to say that you should abandon it, because practice makes perfect, right? But again, that's part of the reason that we have this video today. You need to tinker, and you need to have someone help you figure out if you're actually spinning the ball properly, or if you're just wasting time throwing a four-seamer with a two-seam grip, okay? So Lastly, my recommendations on who should throw a two-seamer are the following. Number one, older pitchers. When you're young, the number one thing is throwing strikes. All the way up through youth baseball, you see kids that just can't really command the zone. And so then now we're asking them to throw a pitch that actually moves out of the zone, if they can make it move. And that doesn't seem to like really help the cause. So if you're between the ages of 7 and 13, a four-seamer and learning to command the zone and feeling like your fastball will reliably go straight to where you want it to go is definitely a good thing. It's a good thing developmentally. Not to mention at slower speeds, the ball just isn't going to move as much. If you're throwing 92 and the ball has that two-seam spin that we want to produce, it's going to have like a short little jagged wrinkle. And that's why two-seamers in the big leagues are so hard to hit. And you see a guy with a good sinker and no one can lift the ball and they're breaking their bats. It's because the movement at that speed is very sudden and kind of jagged and scary. I had a teammate who threw a sinker, pitched 10 years of pro ball, made it to the big leagues, and his two-seamer was like, boom, last minute, just takes you by surprise. And there's no wonder that he was breaking bats and pitching successfully, just kind of chucking the ball down the middle and really letting it run at really high levels of pro baseball. But for young players, their two-seamer just, it doesn't do a whole lot. And so it's okay to focus on command first with a four-seamer, and then as you get older and you start throwing harder and the two-seamer will actually have some good action now, then we can revisit it. So again, it's important to understand what our goals are developmentally as pitchers and as coaches for our young pitchers. And the biggest thing first is command. If you can't command the zone, then you can't pitch, right? If you throw 97 miles per hour, they'll give you chances to keep trying to pitch, but eventually you have to be able to throw strikes. And it can definitely be difficult to find the strike zone if your pitch actually moves a lot. I was accidentally cutting the ball one season, and I was throwing fastballs on the outer third of the plate that I knew were going to be strikes out of my hands that then cut across the zone and were balls. And I was out there like, I don't know what to do right now because that was supposed to be a strike and now it's a ball. Do I need to like change where I'm aiming? It was hard to deal with unintended movement, especially with it coming on like in one game and it lasted for like a 4 or 5 game stretch because I was kind of off mechanically. So you don't want to have that happen. You don't want to suddenly give a kid, you know, one of these crazy like Blake Treinen sinkers where they have a really tough time finding it at a young age. Now that's probably an exaggeration because if you could throw on like Blake Treinen, you definitely throw it. But again, you understand my point. When you're young and you're trying to just throw strikes and have an efficient pitch count and pitch a lot of innings for your team, throwing the ball straight is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But parents tend to freak out when their kids give up hits and give up runs, losing track on the long term, which is your kid needs to really be good at commanding the zone and then learn to command a second and a third pitch, and then try to start to miss barrels and learn how to pitch and do all that other stuff. But command is the first really big thing. Lastly, the next two things, a lower arm slot, again, a lower arm slot guy is going to be a lot better suited for a two-seamer or sinker than a high arm slot guy. And then guys with a repertoire that includes a slider are going to be better suited for a two-seamer than guys who throw a curveball. So it's not to say you can't if you throw a curveball, but when you throw a sinker and a slider, they both come out of the same sort of tunnel window and they go, sinker goes this way, slider goes that way. So they see fastball, sinker, slider. Okay, and that's just like kind of pitch tunneling 101. If you throw a curveball, you're going to be pitching up in the zone a little bit more because your curveball is going to come out high and break down low. And your fastball, if you always throw a two-seamer, is not going to match up as well because you don't ever want to throw two-seamers or sinkers up in the zone because they flatten out and then they're just a slightly slower, bad four-seamer. So guys who throw two-seamers and sinkers have to be committed to being down in the zone all the time, which is where you get your best two-seam movement. You have to be on top of the ball and on the inside of the ball slightly as you're throwing it to actually get it to move. You throw a two-seam and you're always up in the zone, you throw a sinker and you're always up in the zone, you're just going to stink. You're going to be bad at baseball. So if you're committed to throwing a two-seamer or a sinker, you also have to be tacitly committed to being down in the zone. And if you're always down in the zone, then the curveball is up and everything else is down and they don't match up quite as well. So if you throw and you're committed to being down the zone, sinker, slider, or slider, sinker, depending on which hand you are, that's going to make the most sense for your repertoire. So if you're a higher arm slot, power curve kind of pitcher, kind of like I was, two-seamer doesn't fit your repertoire super well. It's not necessarily the best pitch for you. And that's okay. You don't have to have it. Again, you should think about every pitch that you throw as a certain tool. You're just like a carpenter, and it's a tool in your toolbox. You don't have to use every tool. Just because you use a certain type of hammer or saw, another carpenter might use a different type, and that's okay. You can both produce quality work using the tools that fit you best, okay? So I hope this video was helpful. I think the two-seamer is very misunderstood, and most players don't throw it properly, or they're just not good at throwing it where it's not gonna make sense compared to throwing a four-seamer. So if you're a young pitcher or you're a coach, I'd really encourage you to throw a four-seamer and let them just develop command and feel comfortable and consistent that their fastball is gonna go where they want it to go with much more reliability. Then as they start to throw harder, and if they're suited for it, being their arm slot, their velocity, and their repertoire, then teach them a two-seamer, let them tinker with grips, but give them feedback and help them along to learn the pitch and the spin, because otherwise they'll just be throwing a bad version of the four-seamer, and no one, I promise you, no one wants that. All right, so thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, share with a friend, and don't forget to check out my pitching books, which links are in the description below. I also have online pitching courses. I do remote consulting with pitchers and coaches. So check those out, and I'll see you in the next video.